The bundle of blankets on his doorstep shouldn't have been there. Tobias Crawford froze, his morning coffee forgotten in his hand. The rain hammered a lonely rhythm on the tin roof of his cabin, a relentless 3-day assault from the Montana sky. But it wasn't the storm that stopped his heart. It was the tiny fist that punched its way out of the blankets. It was no bigger than a walnut, grasping at the cold, wet air. And then came the sound, a thin, piercing cry that cut through the downpour and right into his soul. 9 months. It had been exactly 9 months to the day. 9 months since lightning had ripped the sky open, and a woman had appeared at his barn door, looking like a drowned ghost. Her name was Ayanna Blackfeather. She had stayed for a short time, turned his entire world upside down, and then vanished as quickly as she came. She'd left nothing behind but questions and a hollow space in his chest. Until now. Staring at the infant, Tobias knew. Some storms don't pass. They just wait. They gather strength in the darkness and come back to change everything you thought you knew. He knelt, his hand trembling as he reached for the note tucked into the folds of the blanket. It wasn't signed, just 5 words in a familiar, elegant script. They have my father. Protect our child. The mountains looked like sleeping giants against the last light of the day. Tobias rode his mare, the trail as familiar to him as the lines on his own hands. He owned 37 acres here, land he'd tamed himself. He'd built the cabin, raised the barn, and filled the root cellar. He was 30 years old, and this land was his life's work. Gold fever had pulled men west by the thousands, but Tobias wasn't looking for gold. He was looking for peace. He'd built a life that was solid, quiet, and predictable. A life where there were no surprises. He was wrong. The rain started as a whisper, then a shout. By the time he reached the barn, the sky had opened up. It was a true Montana gully washer, the kind that could swallow a man whole. He unsaddled his horse, the familiar smells of hay and leather a small comfort against the rage outside. He was reaching for his lantern, ready to head to the cabin and bolt the door when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. It was soft, almost lost in the thunder. But it was there. The sound of someone crying. He grabbed the lantern, his other hand going to the knife on his belt. He'd learned a long time ago that the wilderness didn't give second chances. He swept the lantern light across the empty stalls. Nothing, just shadows playing tricks on him. Then the light found the back corner, and it found her. She was huddled against a wall of hay, knees pulled to her chest, her long black hair hiding her face. A puddle of water was growing around her. She wore a simple dress, soaked through, clinging to her like a second skin. She looked up, and the world tilted on its axis. Her eyes were the color of honey and gold, and they held more pain than any one person should ever have to carry. She couldn't have been more than 20, but her gaze was ancient. She looked like she'd seen the very worst of mankind and had somehow survived it. "Please," she whispered, her voice a fragile thing against the storm. "I just need a place to stay. Until morning." Tobias didn't move. He couldn't. His mind was racing. A native woman in a white man's barn could mean trouble. The kind of trouble that ends with fire and blood. The tension between settlers and the tribes was a constant simmering threat. Helping her could get them both killed. But then he saw past the politics, past the danger. He saw the terror in her eyes. It was a raw, primal fear. Whatever had chased her through the storm had pushed her to the absolute edge. This wasn't a choice anymore. "You're hurt," he said. It wasn't a question. He could see the way she held herself, the shallow, pained breaths she took. She shook her head, a movement that seemed to take all her strength. "Just tired. I'll be gone at first light. I promise." Lightning flashed, turning the barn into a skeleton of light and shadow. The thunder that followed shook the very ground beneath his feet. The storm wasn't passing. It was settling in for the night. Leaving her out in this was a death sentence. He made his decision. "You can't travel in this," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "There's hay in the loft. It's dry. I'll bring you blankets." "I don't want to cause any trouble," she said, her eyes searching his for any sign of a trap. "The only trouble will be me finding your frozen body in my field tomorrow morning," he shot back. "Stay, please." He softened his tone. I'm Tobias Crawford. She hesitated for a long moment, the storm raging around them. Then, so quiet he almost missed it, she spoke her name. Ayanna. It meant eternal blossom. He knew that much from his time trading. A beautiful name for a fragile-looking woman who seemed to be anything but. Ayanna, he repeated. The name felt right on his tongue. Can you make it to the loft? She tried to stand, but a sharp wince of pain shot through her as she put weight on her left leg. He moved to help her, an instinct he couldn't suppress, but she recoiled, flinching away from his touch as if he were fire. I can manage, she said, her voice tight with pride and fear. She managed, but just barely. He followed her up the ladder, the lantern light dancing on her back. The loft was warmer, shielded from the worst of the wind. The air was thick with the sweet smell of dried hay. Wait here, he told her, setting the lantern down. I'll get food and dry clothes. He ran to the cabin through the driving rain, the wind trying to tear the coat from his back. By the time he got inside, he was almost as wet as she was. He grabbed what she would need, one of his own clean shirts, thick wool blankets, a jar of peaches, a loaf of bread, and a bottle of whiskey, for the cold. When he returned, she was exactly where he'd left her, a small, still shape in the vastness of the barn. She'd wrung out her hair, but that was all. She took the supplies with a quiet murmur of thanks. The shirt will be big on you, he said, suddenly feeling awkward. But it's dry. I'll wait downstairs while you change. He went down the ladder and busied himself with his horses, trying not to listen to the soft sounds of movement from the loft above. He hadn't shared his space with another person in years. Not since the war. The feeling was strange, unsettling, like a forgotten part of him was slowly waking up. When she called his name, he climbed back up. She was transformed. His shirt swallowed her, hanging down to her knees. She'd braided her damp hair, and the simple act made her look younger, more vulnerable. She was sitting against a hay bale, eating the bread he'd brought, taking small, deliberate bites. You should eat, he said, sitting a respectful distance away. You are a kind man. My mother taught me kindness doesn't cost a thing. The words were out before he could stop them. He never spoke of his mother. Ayanna looked at him, her honey-gold eyes seeming to see right through him. Your mother was wise. She was stubborn, he said, a small sad smile touching his lips. She would have liked you. I think you don't know me. I know you'd rather face down a storm than ask for help, he replied. That tells me enough. She fell silent, and in that silence, he felt a strange connection to this woman, a sense of understanding that went beyond words. It was as if two lonely souls had found each other in the middle of a tempest. You live alone, she stated. It wasn't a question. By choice, he said. Is it? She asked, and her simple question hit him with the force of a physical blow. Was it a choice? Or had he just let solitude become a habit, a fortress to hide behind? This country is hard, he finally said. Loneliness is part of the price. I understand things I wish I did not, she whispered, and the pain in her voice was so raw, so real, he felt an overwhelming urge to ask her what horrors she was running from. But he didn't. Some wounds are too deep for prying fingers. You're safe here, he said instead. The words were a promise. Whatever it is, you're safe tonight. She looked at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and deep, deep sorrow. You promise things you may not be able to keep. I only promise what's in my power to give. A roll of thunder shook the barn, and they both fell quiet, listening. The storm was a wild thing, but in the small circle of lantern light, a fragile peace was forming. It was a temporary truce with the world outside. Tell me about this place, she said, her voice soft. He found himself wanting to tell her. Everything. He, who never shared his past with anyone, wanted to unburden himself to this stranger. Came west in '62, he began. With my brother Daniel. He had gold fever. I just needed to get away. What kind of reasons? She asked. The kind that haunt a man. She nodded, a silent gesture of complete understanding. My brother struck it rich, he continued. Went back east with more money than we'd ever dreamed of. He wanted me to go with him. Said we could live like kings. But you stayed. I'd built something here, he said, looking around the barn he'd raised with his own 2 hands. This felt more real than gold, more permanent. Do you regret it? He thought about the long, cold winters, the crushing loneliness, the ghosts of the past that sometimes visited him in the dead of night. Regret is too simple a word. I chose this path. It has its own rewards and its own burdens. All choices do, she said. The wind began to die down, the rain softening to a steady drumbeat. The space between them felt smaller now, charged with an unspoken energy. Sometimes, she said, pulling his shirt tighter around herself, the only choice you have is to survive. He knew she wasn't just talking about the storm. The silence that followed was heavy with everything she wasn't saying. He could feel the danger clinging to her like a shroud. She was a spark in the darkness, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that something terrible was coming for that light. The storm is passing, she observed after a while. It is, he said. But the ground will be mud for days. I have to leave at first light. The words hit him harder than he expected. The thought of her vanishing back into the wilderness, back to whatever she was running from, filled him with a strange and sudden dread. Where will you go? He asked. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know. 2 words. 2 simple words that held a universe of fear and desperation. He understood what it meant to be adrift, to have no safe harbor. He knew the risks of offering one, especially to a woman with secrets that could bring death to his door. He looked at her, at the deep exhaustion in her eyes, the terror she was trying so hard to hide, and he made a decision that would change his life forever. Stay, he said. The word hung in the air between them. Stay here, until you figure things out. Her eyes went wide. For a single, fleeting moment, the walls she'd built around herself crumbled. He saw the young woman she might have been, unguarded and hopeful. Then the mask was back in place. You don't know what you're offering, she said, shaking her head. Then tell me. There are people looking for me, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Dangerous people. They will hurt anyone who helps me. What kind of people? She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. Her hands were trembling. The kind of people who believe they can own another human being. The air went out of his lungs. He'd heard the stories. Vile whispers of powerful men taking native women as property, to be used and discarded. He never thought he'd come face to face with it. The kind who don't accept it when their property walks away, she finished, her voice laced with venom. How long have you been running? He asked, his own voice tight with a rage he hadn't felt in years. 3 days, on foot. My horse went lame. 3 days, through this unforgiving country, with monsters on her trail. The sheer will it must have taken was staggering. Who is he? Tobias asked, his voice low and dangerous. A traitor. Silas Garrett. The name landed like a stone in his gut. He knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew of Silas Garrett. A man who operated in the shadows, dealing in whiskey, guns, and human misery. A man who was more snake than human, with a reputation for casual brutality. A man who always got what he wanted. How did you escape? He was drunk, she said. I took his fastest horse and rode until the storm hit. I saw the light from your barn. Why here? Why not go to your people? Pain flashed in her eyes. My people are 2 days' ride from here, and Garrett's men are likely watching the village. I was raised in a mission school. Taught your language, your ways. To a man like Garrett, that makes me valuable. But to some of my own people, it makes me an outsider. She was trapped between 2 worlds, belonging to neither. How long were you with him? He asked, dreading the answer. 4 months. The words were so quiet, so full of shame and horror, that they were like a knife in his heart. He bought me. From a cavalry officer. The rage in his chest burned hotter. This wasn't just one evil man. It was a sickness that had infected the entire territory. He has trackers, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Men from my own tribe, and others. They know this land. They will find me. Then staying here puts you in more danger. Yes. And it puts me in danger. Yes. She was giving him an out. She was laying all the cards on the table, telling him exactly how high the stakes were. He could tell her to leave. He could bolt his door and pretend he'd never seen her. He could go back to his quiet, predictable life. But he knew he couldn't. "There's something you should know about me," he said, his voice steady. "I was a soldier. Ohio Volunteers. I fought at Antietam, at Gettysburg. I came out here to get away from the killing. But I haven't forgotten how." "You would risk your life for a stranger?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "I would risk my life for what's right," he answered. "Sometimes they're the same thing." She studied his face for a long time. He felt like she was weighing his soul. "If I stay," she said finally, "Garrett will come. He won't come alone. And he will kill you to get to me. Let me worry about Garrett. You don't understand the kind of man he is. I understand he's the kind of man who needs to be stopped." The wind had died completely. The only sound was the gentle patter of rain on the roof. Hours ago, his biggest problem was the leak in his woodshed. Now he was preparing for a war. It was madness, pure, undiluted madness, and it felt like the most right thing he'd ever done. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Are you trying to convince me to help you, or not to?" "I'm trying to be honest about the cost." "I appreciate that," he said. "Now answer the question." She looked down at her hands, and when she looked back up, the last of her defenses had fallen away. Her eyes were swimming with tears she refused to let fall. "I'm asking for your help," she whispered. "I'm asking because I'm terrified, because I have nowhere else to go, and because I see something in your eyes that tells me you keep your promises." That was it. The die was cast. "Then you have my help," he said, the words feeling like an oath. "For as long as you need it." "Even if it means facing Silas Garrett?" "Especially if it means facing Silas Garrett." They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. The promise was sealed with a look, an understanding that went deeper than words. Two strangers, bound together by a storm and the threat of a shared enemy. "You should get some sleep," he said, turning down the lantern. "We have to make plans tomorrow." The barn fell into darkness, the only light coming from the moon through the slats in the wall. He settled into the hay below, listening to her arrange the blankets in the loft above. "Tobias?" Her voice drifted down, soft and hesitant. "Yeah? Thank you. Sleep well, Ayanna." But sleep didn't come. Not for either of them. He lay awake, his mind a whirlwind of tactics and preparations. His quiet life was over. The peace he'd worked so hard to build was about to be shattered. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel alone. He felt like a soldier again. A man with a purpose. A man with someone to protect. Dawn would bring danger. It would bring a fight he might not survive. But as he finally drifted off, his last thought wasn't of the violence to come. It was of the woman sleeping in his loft. A woman who had walked out of a storm and into his life, reminding him that some things were worth fighting for, and dying for. The morning was gray and quiet, the world washed clean by the storm. Tobias woke to the sound of soft movement from the loft. He lay still, the events of the night before replaying in his mind. It felt like a dream. A strange, intense fever dream. Then he heard her singing. It was a soft, mournful tune in her own language. And he knew it was real. Everything had changed. He found her in the loft, already dressed in her own damp clothes. His shirt was folded neatly beside the blankets. "You're not still planning on leaving," he said. She met his gaze, her eyes clear and steady in the morning light. "In the daylight, are you still offering to help?" "I am." Then I will stay." They moved her things to the cabin. It wasn't much, but it was defensible. A small fortress of logs and stone. "You built this yourself?" she asked, running a hand over the rough-hewn walls. "With some help," he said. "It's not much, but it's strong. It feels like a home." They fell into an easy rhythm. She moved around his small cabin as if she'd lived there for years. She took his simple supplies and made a meal that tasted better than anything he'd eaten in a decade. As the day wore on, he saw the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. The hunted look in her eyes started to fade. Just a little. But she never strayed far from the window. "Tell me about Garrett," he said over the midday meal. "Everything." She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself to walk through a bad memory. "He's older, gray in his beard, scars on his hands. He claims he has native blood, but it's a lie he uses to get what he wants. He speaks enough of the languages to twist words, to make promises he never keeps." "How many men ride with him?" "It changes, usually 4 or 5, 2 brothers, the Henleys. They're wanted men, and a tracker named Thomas Blackhorse. He's half Crow. And he's good. Very good." "What's his weakness?" "Whiskey," she said without hesitation. "And pride. He thinks he's untouchable. He underestimates everyone." Tobias filed the information away, a battle plan already starting to form in his mind. The odds were long, but he'd faced long odds before. "How far behind you do you think they are?" "The storm might have slowed them, but Blackhorse can follow a trail that's days old. If Garrett wants me back, they'll find this place. Then we'll be ready for them." He spent the afternoon preparing for war. He cleaned his rifle, a .61 Springfield he'd carried through the Civil War. He cleaned his Colt revolver. He counted his ammunition. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. He walked the perimeter of his property, mapping out lines of sight, fields of fire, and potential escape routes. The cabin was on a small rise, which was good. A creek ran along the back of the property, which was also good. A place to get water. A way out, if it came to that. As darkness fell, they sat by the fire, the silence comfortable. "What will you do?" he asked her. "If we get through this?" She stared into the flames for a long time. "I'd like to find a place where I belong. A place where being educated doesn't make me a stranger to my own people, and being Crow doesn't make me an animal in the eyes of yours." "That place might not exist," he said softly. "Then I will make it," she said, and the quiet determination in her voice sent a shiver down his spine. "What about you?" she asked. "Me? I guess I figured I'd just keep on like this, alone." "You've been alone," she said, her gaze penetrating. "That's not the same as choosing to be alone forever." He had no answer for that. It was close to midnight when he heard it, a single, sharp crack of a twig breaking. It was a sound that didn't belong in the night. He was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. Across the room, Ayanna was already at the window, her body rigid. She'd heard it too. "Horses," she whispered. "At least 3 of them. Moving slow." He peered through a crack in the shutters. The darkness was absolute, but he knew his land. He knew every tree, every rock, and he saw them. Shadows moving within the shadows at the edge of the tree line. They were 200 yards out, maybe less. They were being watched. "Is it him?" he breathed. "It's his way," she said. "He likes to watch, to wait. He'll attack at dawn, when we're sleeping." That gave them a few hours. Another shadow detached from the group, circling to the east. A third moved west. "They're surrounding us," Ayanna said, her voice grim. "Good," Tobias said, a cold calm settling over him. "It means they think we're trapped. Overconfidence makes men careless." They worked in silence, barricading the door, reinforcing the shutters. The cozy cabin was transformed into a bunker. "There's something you need to know," Ayanna said, her back to him. "Garrett won't try to kill me. I'm too valuable to him, but he will kill you, and he'll make me watch. I'm not afraid of him." "You should be," she said, turning to face him, her eyes blazing in the firelight. "Fear is what keeps you alive. So is anger." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw a flicker of something new in her eyes. Not fear, not gratitude, Something else. Respect. There's another way, she said suddenly. What way? I could go out there, give myself up. If I tell him I hid in your barn without you knowing, he might let you live. No. The word was flat, final. Tobias, listen to me. No, he repeated, stepping closer to her. I saw men die in the war because they thought their lives were worth less than someone else's. I won't let that happen here. We fight. Together. What if you're wrong? What if we die? Then we die, he said simply. But we die on our feet. We die free. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she gave a slow, deliberate nod. We fight. The hours before dawn were the longest of his life. They sat in the darkness, weapons ready, listening to the sounds of the night, listening for the sounds of approaching death. Can you shoot? He asked her. Well enough, she replied. He handed her his pistol. It's not accurate at a distance, but it'll do the job up close. As the first hint of gray light touched the horizon, they took their positions. Whatever happens, he said into the quiet, I want you to know, having you here, it woke something up in me I thought was long dead. What? She whispered. The will to fight for something more than just myself. Before she could answer, they saw movement. 3 riders emerging from the trees, walking their horses slow and easy toward the cabin. A 4th stayed behind, a sniper in the shadows. The man in the middle was tall, with a gray beard. Silas Garrett. Crawford! Garrett's voice boomed across the clearing. I know you're in there, and I know you have my property. Send her out and we'll call it a day. Tobias remained silent, his eye pressed to the stock of his rifle. Don't be a fool! Garrett yelled. She ain't worth dying for! Still, Tobias didn't move. Have it your way, Garrett sneered. He nodded to the man on his right. The man raised his rifle. A puff of smoke. The crack of the shot. The window beside Tobias's head exploded, showering him with glass. That was the moment. Tobias squeezed the trigger. His shot didn't hit Garrett, but it was close enough to make the man dive from his horse. It was the answer Garrett was waiting for. All hell broke loose. The world dissolved into a nightmare of noise and smoke. Gunfire erupted from 3 different directions, tearing into the log walls of the cabin. Splinters flew through the air like shrapnel. Tobias and Ayanna fought back like cornered animals. He was a machine, loading and firing his rifle with a grim efficiency he hadn't used in 10 years. She was a revelation. Calm, steady, making every shot with the pistol count. For what felt like an eternity, they held them off. But they were outnumbered, and their ammunition was running low. Then he heard her cry out. He turned to see her stagger back from the window, her hand clamped to her shoulder. A dark stain was spreading across her dress. How bad? He yelled over the gunfire. It's just a scratch, she lied. But her face was pale, and he could see she was losing blood fast. They were losing. And he was out of time. He had one last, desperate idea. A stupid, reckless plan that would either save them or get them both killed. Can you keep them busy for 5 minutes? He shouted. What are you going to do? Something stupid. He grabbed the last of the whiskey, a lantern, and a strip of cloth. He worked fast, his hands a blur, creating a makeshift firebomb. When I yell, put every bullet you have left into the tree line, he instructed her. Don't stop shooting until you're empty. He took a deep breath. Now! Ayanna opened fire, the pistol barking again and again. Under the cover of her barrage, Tobias kicked open the back door and sprinted for the barn. Bullets chewed up the ground around him. He felt a searing pain in his thigh, but didn't stop. He dove behind a water trough, lit the cloth wick on his bomb, and hurled it with all his might toward the sniper in the trees. The explosion wasn't huge, but it was bright and loud. It sent a shower of burning oil and smoke into the trees where the 4th man was hiding. There was a scream. The sniper was out of the fight. And for a few precious seconds, the other men were confused, disoriented. It was the opening he needed. He burst from behind the barn, firing his rifle from the hip, attacking them from their flank. It was brutal, Close quarters fighting, a storm of lead and fury. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Garrett's men were down. The third, one of the Henley brothers, had fled. And then there were 2. Tobias stood 20 feet from Silas Garrett. Both men were wounded. Both were out of ammunition. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, Crawford," Garrett snarled, pulling a long, wicked-looking cavalry saber from his belt. "Good," Tobias said, gripping the empty rifle like a club. The fight was short, savage, and silent except for the grunts of exertion and the clash of steel against wood. It ended with Garrett on the ground, his own saber buried in his chest. His reign of terror was over. Tobias staggered back to the cabin. He was bleeding from a dozen small cuts and the gash in his thigh. He found Ayanna slumped against the wall, pale but conscious, her eyes burning with intensity. "Is it over?" she whispered. "It's over," he said, collapsing to the floor beside her. "What now?" He looked at her, at this incredible, brave woman who had turned his life inside out. "Now," he said, a weary smile touching his lips. "Now, we heal." The weeks that followed were a blur of healing and discovery. As their wounds mended, something else grew between them. It started with shared glances, then lingering touches. The alliance born of desperation slowly, beautifully, transformed into love. They were married by a traveling preacher that winter, with the snow falling softly outside the cabin windows. It was a simple ceremony, but it was the most real thing that had ever happened to him. For the first time since the war, Tobias felt whole. He had a wife, a partner, a reason to wake up in the morning that went beyond just surviving another day. Spring came, and with it, the news that their small family was about to grow. They spent the summer in a state of joyful preparation, expanding the cabin, planting a bigger garden. The ghosts of the past were finally quiet. They had a future. Their daughter, Sarah, was born in the fall. She was perfect. She had her mother's dark hair and his own gray eyes. For 3 weeks, life was a perfect, blissful dream. Then the nightmare returned. He woke one morning to an empty bed, a cold, empty cabin. They were gone. Both of them, Ayanna and their baby girl. All that was left was a note on the pillow where her head should have been. "My dearest Tobias, Garrett wasn't the end. He had partners, powerful men. They have been asking questions in town. They are looking for me. For the child of a Crow woman and a white man, they will never stop looking. I cannot let them find you. I cannot let our daughter grow up in the shadow of their evil. The only way to keep you both safe is to disappear, to lead them away from you. This is the hardest thing I have ever done. Please know that I love you. I will love you until my last breath. Don't look for me. Live your life. Raise our daughter to be strong and proud. Tell her that her mother was a woman who loved her more than life itself. Yours forever, Ayanna." He did look for her. He spent weeks, months, riding to every town, every settlement, every trading post in the territory. No one had seen her. It was as if she and Sarah had been swallowed by the wilderness. He returned to his cabin a broken man. He raised Sarah alone, pouring all the love and pain in his heart into the little girl. He told her stories of her brave mother. He taught her to be proud of who she was. And every night he prayed that Ayanna would find a way to come home. He never gave up hope. And now, 9 months after she had vanished, he stood on his own doorstep, the rain soaking him to the bone, holding a second child. A son. Their son. The note in his hand explained the impossible. "They have my father. Protect our child." She hadn't run to save herself. She had been taken. Her disappearance wasn't a choice. It was a ransom. Her own father, a tribal chief, held hostage by Garrett's old network. She'd been a prisoner all this time. She must have escaped, just for a night. Long enough to give birth. Long enough to bring their son to the only safe place she knew. To the only man she trusted. Then she'd had to go back. Back to the monsters. His daughter, Sarah, started to cry from inside the cabin, awakened by the cries of the brother she had never met. His life had been shattered and rebuilt, only to be shattered again. He was no longer just a father of one, but of 2. 2 children who were half hunted, half survivor, just like their parents. He looked down at the baby in his arms. His son. He had Ayana's eyes. "Your mother," he whispered, his voice thick with a mix of awe and heartbreak, "is the strongest person this world has ever known." He walked inside, bolting the door behind him. He laid his son down gently next to his daughter. He looked at their sleeping faces, these 2 perfect pieces of his and Ayana's impossible love. He understood now. His war with Silas Garrett hadn't ended when the man died. That was just one battle. The war was for his family's soul, and it was far from over. He picked up his rifle. He walked to the window and stood watch, his eyes scanning the tree line. The rain was finally stopping. A new day was dawning. He was not just a farmer anymore. He was not a lonely homesteader. He was a guardian, a protector. He would keep their children safe. He would honor her sacrifice, and he would wait. And if those men ever came to his door, he would be ready. He would send every last one of them to hell. That was a promise. What would you do in his position? If you enjoyed this story and want to see what happens next, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more.